And
Todd over there, Dr. Perry. Raise your hand, Dr. Perry, so we can see you. Then we'll come to Brother Tim. But a question from online from Laura Esselbach. She says, Elder Bohr, how does correctly looking back to historical events repeating themselves lead you to the conclusion that Sister White is inferring a change of the King of the South player from radical Islamic system to atheism or communist philosophy, especially since atheism is being brought into Catholic faith by this current Pope, which would seem to contradict your change?
okay, that's a very good question. I've written several newsletters. We have a newsletter at Secrets Unsealed, and it's a pretty hefty article that I write for each one. Benedict XVI and John Paul II considered communism to be the deadly enemy of the Roman Catholic Church. But Francis I has drawn close to atheism. In fact, there are some conservative Roman Catholics that consider that Francis I is a communist. In fact, they say he's a communist. There's this Spanish program on television, his name is Bailey, and he openly says, he's not an Adventist, obviously, he says the Pope is a communist because what he has tried to do is kind of merge with Catholicism. We usually think that the papacy is going to destroy communism, but really it's the papacy joining communism, because this pope is not really primarily a religious pope. He's a pope that wants to recover political power.
Yeah, and if I may just add to that as well, the papacy is neither right nor left, but it can work with both sides. And Thomas Aquinas discussed at some length the rights of property, private property. And from a Marxist perspective, all the goods and means of production should be held in common. And in Catholic theology, you have divine law, and you have natural law, and you have God's law, and then you have human law, which kind of is the bottom of this hierarchy of laws. And Aquinas argued that private property should only be held or allowed in a Catholic worldview if it is held for the common good. That is, private property held for the benefit of the individual is not legitimately held private property. And so on that basis, the Catholic Church can work with right-wing regimes and also with left-wing regimes. And throughout history, the Catholic Church will baptize somebody else's beliefs and give it a Catholic spin. So in Latin America, with left-wing Marxist guerrillas, they come out with liberation theology. If you go to Brazil, you see in the Catholic churches, they basically baptize the African animist faiths in parts of Brazil and call their demons, they're now called saints. And as you go around the world, you see that Catholicism baptizes and sanctifies with the Catholic veneer the ideologies or the faiths of wherever they happen to be. And so I think that the Catholic way of conquering is not just through persecution, but more insidiously, it's through amalgamation or incorporation with a new veneer on it. So in that sense, I think that the Catholic Church can easily work with the Marxists. The Catholics work with the Communist Party of China as much as they did with the Nazis in World War II.
Yep.
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Dr. Gain.
In light of that, that's very...
Your microphone.
Are we on?
Yes.
Yeah. In light of that, it's very interesting. In Adventist eschatology, we regard end-time Babylon in Revelation 17 and so on as consisting of the papacy and spiritualism and apostate Protestantism. Occult is paganism. Would you agree with that? And
Obviously.
Obviously. And at the same time, ancient Egypt, it was not, Ellen White refers to it as atheistic in that it was against the true God. They were really polytheists. They were pagans. They were anti-theists in terms of against the true God. So my question is this: if the king of the north is the papacy and the king of the south is spiritualism, paganism, the same as Egypt, atheism, why would they fight each other?
Okay, I see the dragon, spiritualism, differently. Actually, spiritualism is controlled by all three. All three are characterized by spiritualism because it says, I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, three evil spirits like frogs. So they're all controlled by spiritualism. It's the glue that brings them together. What does the dragon represent? We always say the dragon represents spiritualism. But really, Ellen White defines in Testimonies to Ministers the dragon as kings, rulers, the kings and rulers of the world. The dragon in Revelation chapter 12 is Satan, yes, but working through Rome. The dragon during the 1260 years persecutes the woman, but that's Satan through papal Rome. And at the end of time, the land beast speaks as a dragon, which means it's going to speak like Rome. So in other words, all three are controlled by spiritualism. It's the glue, but really the dragon represents the political powers of the world. So you have these three powers joining forces. The kings, and you have the false prophet, and you have the beast that are mentioned in Revelation 16, verse 13. And that's picked up in Revelation 17 with different symbolism. In Revelation 17, it's no longer the beast, it's the harlot. No longer is it the beast from the earth or the false prophet, it's the daughters. No longer is it the dragon, but the kings of the earth. And the reason why that it changes terminology is because it wants to make a connection with Babylon in chapter 17. So
I agree with you on all of that. My question is about Daniel 11, verse 40, because if the king of the north is attacked, which is the papacy, is attacked by the king of the south, and the king of the south is atheism or secularism, which is essentially one with pagan and occult, all controlled by this dragon figure, then it seems like they would be allies rather than the king of the south attacking the king of the north. It doesn't make really very good ideological sense to me. It seems to make more sense that it would be something outside of that would be attacking the king of the north.
Yeah, the way I see it is that Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, when it speaks about the king of the south, it's not referring merely to atheism, as I shared with my presentation. It starts with atheism, which basically secularizes France. But it continues because the time of the end has a starting point, but it's also a period after that starting point. It then becomes all the nations of the West now withdraw their support from the papacy, and they establish representative governments, democratic governments. And so now the papacy is inactive, the papacy is bound or with a deadly wound. So the deadly wound is healed when the king of the south, which would represent all of these nations that originated with the spirit of the French Revolution, now restore the power to the papacy. And then beginning with verse 41 through verse 43, you have the onslaught of the king of the north recovering his power and conquering the king of the south. So it's broader than just the atheism of France. It begins there, but then, like the papacy fell in 1798, but it still exists in the time of the end. It still has a role to play.
I'm understanding you, but if the king of the south now is the secular powers, including now the United States, which is in the spirit of the French Revolution, we all agree with that, that it's being withholding, then at the time, then there's a final battle at which the papacy defeats the United States and all of the other the secular powers. Is that what I'm hearing?
But it defeats it not militarily.
Oh.
It defeats the United States by getting the United States to enact laws that contradict its Constitution. If I could just share here a moment, see if I can find this.
I think a helpful analogy would be the Roman writer Tertullian complains that while Rome had conquered Greece militarily, Greece conquered Rome culturally. And the assault, let's assume that 1798 and the French Revolution taking out the papacy, which was a historical event, that was the first contact between them. But as we go later through that chapter, we see that the papacy in a reinvigorated form actually is in alliance with these otherwise that were then secular states. They now lend them lend the papacy their authority.
Yeah, with regard to the United States, some people think, well, the last power that's going to rule is the second beast of Revelation 13, because it comes after the first beast that had the deadly wound. However, the entire purpose of the second beast of Revelation 13 is to restore the power of the first beast. And that's why, let me give you a list. The land beast will speak like a dragon. Well, who was the dragon that tried to slay the man-child? Satan through Rome. Who was the dragon that persecuted the woman for 1,260 years? Revelation 12 says it was the dragon that persecuted the woman. So Rome, the United States, is going to exercise the power of the dragon of Rome to persecute God's people at the end of time. And then we have the land beast exercises all of the authority of the first beast. It forces everyone to worship the first beast. It does everything in the presence of the first beast. It makes an image of the first beast. These are all things in Revelation 13. It will make an image in honor of the first beast. It will enforce the mark of the first beast. And Revelation 19 verse 20 tells us that it will deceive by signs and wonders people to receive the mark of the beast. So everything that this beast does, this second beast, is to cater to the first beast and restore power to it. So the papacy is not going to conquer the United States militarily because they have no tanks and they have no nuclear weapons. It is going to be through artifice. And that's what Daniel 11 describes. This as a deceptive power that wins not by military might, but wins by craft.
All right, so we have a couple of other questions. Dr. Perry, you have a question for us, and then come forward here.
You're a little bit hitting on my question. I'm seeing that where we're talking about entities and powers that are coming up against papal Rome, whether it's Islam, whether it's atheism, whether it's communism. But to me, a bigger force is the United States Constitution and the First Amendment and the separation of church and state. Where do you see those in Daniel 11?
You don't have, you can't stay in just one prophecy. You have to look at all of the cumulus of descriptions in Scripture. Like, for example, if you read Daniel 7, you'll never know that the little horn is going to have a second period. Even Daniel 8, it's not clear that it's going to have a second period of dominion. Where do you have to go to know that it is? You have to go to Revelation 13. The same is true with the man of sin of 2 Thessalonians 2. That doesn't give you the complete picture. You have to go to description in Daniel 11. You have to go to Daniel chapter 8. In other words, you have to take a look at all of the passages that deal with the Antichrist. This system is called the little horn, the beast, the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist, the harlot, the king of the north. It's given many different names. And to get a complete picture, you have to look at all of the passages and then relate them to one another. So what is not in Daniel 11, we'll find in other places where you deal, and you're not taking things out of context, you're studying passages that deal with the same historical period and the same power that we're talking about in Daniel 11.
All right, thank you. Next guy here, raise your hands for Todd. And thank you very much, Todd, for helping us in this way.
Yes. Yes, my name's Tim Hayden. Thank you for coming all this distance, Pastor Bohr, to be with us and sharing what you know about Daniel 11. I really appreciate that. I have one question. In the great controversy in the Time of Trouble chapter, Ellen White links the making of a death decree and the appearance of Satan. And the question that I have is, do you see that at all in Daniel 11 in your studies of the appearance of Satan?
Okay, I don't see in Daniel chapter 11 the counterfeiting of the second coming of Christ. For that, you have to go to Matthew 24, which is where Ellen White describes she doesn't say the impersonation, she says the personation of Christ. And the description that she gives is amazing. when she describes how Satan's going to counterfeit the second coming of Christ. And by the way, that is after the close of probation.
Yes.
The counterfeit second coming is not before the close of probation, it's after. We know that for two reasons. The first reason is that Ellen White has it in the chapter on the time of trouble, after the close of probation. The second reason is that Matthew 24 is in chronological order. It has all of the main events, end-time events, in the order in which they're going to occur, one event after another. And in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21, it says there will be then great tribulation. The word tribulation appears twice in Matthew 24. It appears in verse 9, unqualified. You will have tribulations, and you will be hated by all nations, and they will kill some of you. That's what Ellen White calls the little time of trouble. But when you get to verse 21, after the abomination of desolation is set up, which is the Sunday law, in verse 21, it says the megale tribulation, the great tribulation. And then immediately after that, it says, then, if someone says to you, it's the word tote in Greek, which according to the lexicon means this event happens after this one and this one after this one. Matthew 24 is in chronological order. Then it says, then if somebody says he is in the desert or he's in the inner rooms, don't go out. So does that help?
Yes, it helps, yes. One thing I've noticed, Ellen White talks about that when the Satan
Brother
appears.
Tim, microphone up.
Yeah, when Satan appears, he comes in the garments of royalty and with majesty. And the king of the north described in verse 45
Good point.
is, with majesty.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I just linked that, but yeah, I think it's something that needs to be studied
excellent
more.
point. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Pastor Boy, you raised that point about the appearance of Satan. And yesterday we touched on this briefly with 2 Thessalonians 2, the parousia of the lawless one. But as we were talking about it yesterday, some of the people came up to me and said, like, where are you getting this from, the appearance of Satan? And I went straight to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 18, which says, and the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore. And they turned in their Bibles and they said, oh, that isn't in our Bibles. And it's not in the King James. That verse just doesn't appear in the King James Version, but it doesn't appear in the majority text, but it appears in the Alexandrian and the eclectic text. And so you have, in Revelation 13, you have the dragon, who is an apostate son, and the dragon is Satan, that's the father. You have the papacy is a fake son, and America fulfills the role of the fake spirit. You have this fake trinity throughout Revelation 13, but that's based on this verse 12:18, that the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore before the peoples of the world. And it was an interesting thing to me yesterday for people to come up to me and say, we've never seen that verse before because it's not in the King James. And I said, well, read it. There are other versions out there.
If I could just mention one other thing.
Yes.
People will object and they'll say, Satan pretty much knows the group that have been sealed that are going through the time of trouble because they're praying to the Lord and agonizing before God, which I'm going to preach on tomorrow. The parable of the persistent widow applies to this very moment. The parables of Christ are very eschatological. And so what they say is, well, what good would it do for Satan to counterfeit the second coming of Christ after the close of probation if he knows that he's not going to be able to deceive God's people? And my answer is this: he does it because the devil is the devil. Let me give you an example. Does Satan know that after the millennium, when the wicked resurrect, he's not going to be able to conquer the city?
Yes.
If he doesn't, he's not very smart, because he can read Revelation chapter 20. So here's the question. Why is he going to gather all the wicked, surround the city, prepare military weapons, and get ready to attack the city? Because the devil is the devil, and he doesn't give up. And so even though Satan knows that he's not going to be able to deceive the elect, he says, maybe just this once I'll be able to counteract the word of God and go against what God says.
All right, we have a question from Pastor Rosenberg. Then I've got a couple from online here. So